Well, Adam Kimble, we are back. Week 3 of the wheel is done. You are moving on to your third location at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about how this episode went and what it was like for you. You were on, I believe it was the island this time. Was that where you
Yes.
were?
Yep. Island was a second zone for me, and didn't know it at the time, but a little intimidating because it was the zone where the first person was eliminated. So,
Yeah, so like we said, we talked about last time you got to the island, and last week we talked about how getting to the island was just as sort of adventurous as once you were on the island. I think
right.
we saw a lot of other people throughout the episode, and a little bit about you, but you got a crab meal along the way. That you got a little emotional about thinking about your friend Mark. So can you tell us a little bit about that crab meal and then about eating in general, I guess, on the island?
Yeah. So when I was in the tundra for the first 8 days, I did not eat anything other than I had a few like rose hip berries. So I had a handful of those. I had some greens that I would just boil up. So just, and I love, it's funny because in my everyday life, I'm mostly plant-based when it comes to eating. And so I love greens, but out there it's like you need anything but that. Like you need it for the roughage and stuff, but you just need so much more of the protein and fats and things that you're not getting. So I had very, very little to eat at all in the tundra. So finding that crab that was probably the third or fourth day, maybe the third day that I was at the island. That was a huge find, and I can say unequivocally it was the tastiest crab I've ever had in my life. So that was huge, something I really, really needed, and that kind of kick-started a few days of getting some food in the system. They didn't show much of this. There's actually I mentioned that Discovery Channel and The Wheel will release extra footage on their Facebook pages. And so there was a video they released, I think, yesterday, and I shared it to my athlete Facebook page, and it's got me kind of going around on these rocks and hunting for shellfish, which ended up being my primary source of food at the island. It took me a few days to figure out where they were, but then once I started finding them, I was actually eating fairly good there, which was a big change from the first zone.
Yeah, was it good? Were you kind of just like, it seems like in watching the show, it's kind of feast or famine. I mean, you don't really know. Like, if you find a fuel source, you just go after it for as much as you can possibly eat.
Yeah, totally. And that's like what's interesting is that the different zones provide different challenges. So for the tundra, it really wasn't it was cold but not too cold. It was comfortable. There's not really any predators in the tundra. So what makes the tundra hard is the lack of food. So there's usually one thing in each zone that makes it really hard. For the island, there was more food, but the challenging part was that it rains all the time and can get really, really cold. So you can be really uncomfortable. So and now I just headed to the Amazon, and the Amazon is full of predators and can be really hot, and you can get dehydrated. So there's always like a different thing in each zone that makes it really threatening or tough to survive in.
Yeah, so I guess I want to move on to talk a little bit about Luke. We saw him, he had some nasty sort of, it's either leafcutter ants or some either plant or animal just bit the crap out of him. And I mean, kind of, I feel like survival 101 that you are taught anywhere is that you want to create a barrier between you and the ground and not sleep on the ground. And I noticed he was sleeping like directly, like sleeping bag, ground. There was no
Right.
buffer in between it. So my guess, I mean, they didn't tell us in the show, is that if it was an ant or something, they just crawled into his sleeping bag or whatnot. So can you talk a little bit about like how you slept so far, and were you off the ground or what was it like when you had to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Luke quickly learned his lesson about that. And what's funny is that Luke is great at building things, so he probably, after that happened, wished he had built a platform a little bit sooner. But yeah, I am not the builder that Luke is, so I was really all about. I talked about efficiency with my shelters, making something that would keep me dry and not cause me to exert too much energy building it. So sometimes I would be off the ground. Sometimes I'd be on the ground, but usually if I was laying on the ground, I would create some kind of a barrier between myself and the actual ground. So, for example, in the island, I took a whole bunch. I was laying on the ground, but I took a whole bunch of bamboo. There was bamboo everywhere, and I was cutting that. And then I kind of created like a base layer of bamboo that I was laying on top of just to create, a little space between you and the direct ground where there could be things to bite you and that kind of thing. And with Luke, I'm pretty sure there was a type of tick that was what bit him. That's what he talked about on the show. And I don't think it's like the traditional deer ticks that we're used to in like the woods and things. I think it's a different kind of like more of like a chigger type thing that clearly can bite you all over, because he had a nasty looking like rash type thing all over his body. So yeah, that's very important to stay off the ground, especially in I think in warmer climates where there's more predators, things that could potentially bite you or give you some sort of a rash like Luke got.
Yeah. I think everybody felt bad for him watching that
Man.
part. It just looked so painful, and
yeah,
even a small rash would be painful, but all over your body like that's awful.
yeah, and in that kind of an environment too, where he doesn't have ointments and things that he can use to make the rash go away quicker. He's just gonna kind of wear it until it goes away.
Yeah, it's you just, I guess, roll in the mud like he did.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. That's the best thing you can do when you're out in the middle of nowhere in the wetlands.
Yeah, it seemed like this week the emotions of being away from home kind of started to hit everybody, whether it all hit you guys on the same day or it just ended up that you were all in the same sort of all at the same stage and had this wave of emotion come after you. I think the most poignant of all of them would probably be Josh, and writing the letter to his mom on the back of that memento. I know you guys didn't, as we talked about before, you guys didn't really tell each other what happened to each of you guys. So what was that like, sort of watching him have that emotion? And did you at any point, I mean, maybe we see it, maybe we won't, but have an emotion similar to that you like pulled at you?
Yeah. No, totally. I think, like we said before, I think it was definitely emotional week on the wheel, the way it was edited, at least. And, it's watching that moment with Josh. For me personally, it really hit home with me because I was blown away by. I knew it was going to be hard, and I think the other contestants felt the same way. We knew it was going to be hard being away from family and friends, but you don't realize what the complete lack of contact does. It's like, even if you could get a phone call in with a loved one, if Josh, or in that moment, if Josh could have called his mom and just been like, "Mom, I miss you. I love you. It's great to hear from you," that might have completely just like cleared his mind and he would have been good to go. But because you can't do that, then it's like you start to think about the little interactions that, Josh in that moment, he was talking about how he felt like he had, in some ways, taken for granted his relationship with his mom. And he probably at that moment was thinking about all the little things that, like, the way they behaved with each other and what he loved about, his mom's personality and things like that. You have so much time to analyze those things. And then that can really mentally affect you and cause you to get emotional, as you saw from the show. So it was, I thought it was a special moment and really cool. Sometimes emotion can appear cheesy on TV, but I thought in Josh's interaction, it was really authentic, and you could tell how much that meant to him. And for me, there's definitely some emotional moments like that I'm sure will come in maybe next episode. We'll see. But definitely moments where oftentimes it was thinking about Mark and just wondering how Mark was doing. He had stage 4 brain cancer, so that is obviously about as serious as it can get when it comes to disease. And so not knowing how he was doing, from moment to moment, that was really affecting me emotionally, because it's like he could be, in a really bad shape right now and I have no idea. And it's tough to wrap your head around that and be comfortable with that, Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I would imagine too that at least someone like you who has run ultra marathons, I mean, you ran across the country. We documented that. You had people with you, but a lot of that time, it's just you pounding the pavement by yourself. those long endurance sort of endeavors, or survival in this case, they really
Yeah.
make you like they unlock all those sort of doors or boxes we've created in our mind. So I'd
Yeah.
imagine a lot of time those boxes burst open.
Yeah, totally. And I think I've mentioned this before. There's a lot of facets to the wheel that make it so difficult. And I think the emotional side of it was one that I hadn't unlocked in that way before, like you're talking about, because with the run across the country, the mental part was a beast, and you have to dig deep and go to a place that sometimes you never knew you could go to, to get through something. And the physical side of it as well. So I think the emotional side was just one that I hadn't experienced to that degree. There's always like a level, like you said, you're in solitude, but there's always a level of communication with somebody, and this was just different than that, and it made it pretty hard.
And I guess one thing before I let you go for this week and we wrap this week up is that for the first time we saw somebody break into their food rations. Now, they've kind of mentioned you guys had about 3 days of food rations that you were given,
Yep.
like for in case of an emergency situations. But how hard is it knowing you have beans, rice, or whatever? What is in that food ration? Now, we saw beans and rice, but what else is in there?
There was beans, rice, some trail mix, and beef jerky. There was those four things, and there was together an estimated 3 days worth of food. So yeah, it's interesting to see how people are managing that. It seems like people are trying to hold, all the contestants are trying to hold out as long as possible. But if you saw at the end of the show in the teaser for next week, Josh mentions that he has almost blown through all of his. We haven't seen it on screen, but he's like, I'm glad to be here in the island. It looks like it's teeming with life because I've kind of blazed through my rations and I don't have a whole lot of food left. So it's interesting to see, but it's definitely one of those things where for me it was, it's comforting knowing that it's there, but also the thought I kept having was, what if the next place I go to has less food than here, So it's always forward thinking and trying to reserve those rations as long as you can, no matter how hungry you get. And I think for me, it was really good initially that I started in the tundra because there's no food there, but I was coming off of having a normal amount of food,
cheeseburgers and
Yes.
as much calories as you can possibly eat.
Right. Eating, like we said, 5 times a day or whatever it is. So I think it was a good place for me. I was fortunate to start in the tundra for that reason, because then I could hold out a little bit longer. Whereas if I had gotten there, 2 weeks in, I might have been like, I'm just going to eat all the rations right now,
Well, great. Well, I'm really excited to see what happens next when you end up in the Amazon. I mean, I hate to say it. The tundra, you didn't, like you said, there wasn't a lot of food, but temperature and everything else wise, it was pretty comfortable.
Yep.
The island, you had some weather that wasn't so great, but you had tons of food. So
Right.
So
Exactly.
now you're about to go somewhere that is going to be completely different. So it'll be interesting to see how you tackle it versus some of the other or not really competitors or contestants, just other participants.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And this will be cool too, because this zone is 16 days long. So we'll see how everybody does and if they can make it through the whole way. And I'm also excited because I think there's been only 2 or 3 people that have said something to me about it, but there was a teaser, or I guess a commercial or preview for next week's episode where it shows me interacting with an animal, and it's like an unbelievable experience, and I'm really excited to see it. So that'll be on next week's episode.
Well, excellent. Well, we will be watching next week. Make sure for those that just watch this, it is Friday nights, Discovery Channel. Depending on what time zone you're in, check the time.
Yep.
But check out the wheel, and if you miss it when it's on air, you can always catch it online the next day, which is what I've been doing.
Discovery Go app.
Yeah.
Super easy. Yep.
Yeah. So thanks, Adam. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate it. See you next week.
See you next week.